Welcome back to another Dolphin Computer Series video. Today we got quite the collection of technology up here in front of us, because today we're going to be discussing the different types of processors that are commonly used for our business, our pleasure, and our commercial needs. So we're going to start off here with the Powerpc here really quick, which is the reason why this video starts off to begin with and why we even are doing this video. So a brief history on this computer is it's a 2003 model. It actually came from a school in Southern California known as Tamalpais High School. I tried to get more information on it. I contacted them, and they were basically not very helpful. They really didn't want to give out any information. All they said was it was gone a long time ago, that they were actually kind of wondering how I got my hands on it, and I told him I had bought it off of a seller in eBay. He had listed it as 4 parts, and I'm assuming he did that because it didn't come with a charger, but it works perfectly fine. In fact, on the next video, we're going to play some games on it. If I can kind of reshuffle here really quick so I can show you guys. It does power on, and everything seems to work. I actually copied the hard drive because this thing is about 20 years old. So it's not a matter of when, if the hard drive fails, it's more of a matter of when. So I actually did a complete copy of it. So in the event that it does die, we could actually copy it on to a new one. And at that point, I actually put a solid state in it where there's an IDE to SD card conversion. We could copy it over and we'd be set for many, many years to come. It's currently running 10.4 Tiger. I think it's 10.4.11 if I remember correctly. But for being 20 years old, it actually runs really well. This is an example of a survivor computer because, believe it or not, this is in excellent condition for being used in a school. Usually schools, laptops, and computers tend to get beat up, destroyed, and they don't tend to last very long. But like I said here, everything is in good condition. Everything works. All the keys work. The power button works. The screen works. The battery was replaced at one point, but that's to be expected. But there's barely any scratches. There's no dents on it. And the only thing I haven't tested is the CD drive, but I really don't have use for it. This is definitely going to be my collector's item, and one day it will be on display. Look, even the front lights up as well. These don't have a hinge, a magnetic hold. They have a latch to hold the screen in place. But as you see, everything works. Again, I wasn't really able to get much information on it. So since this is in good condition, I'm going to assume that everything here is original, minus the battery, of course. But batteries, you know, do wear out and they do need to be replaced. In fact, this one, I haven't done my research on it, but they use the battery pack that's actually rebuildable. Instead of like your phone where it's like a flat little plate, it's actually a bunch of little cells that look like AA batteries that you can replace yourself. So in the future, if I do need to have the batteries replaced, I could actually do that myself and just order the cells instead of having to buy a whole new battery pack. So back to what I was saying, since this was in a school and it's in such good condition, I'm going to safely assume that this belonged to the teacher or the professor, however you want to call it, or this was an administrator's and it didn't get to see a lot of use because this was a high school that it went to. So again, usually when it belongs to a student, it gets beat up, lost, destroyed, heavily damaged. But like I said, this one's in very good condition. So that's my hypothesis. Again, I really don't have any proof because I wasn't able to get much information on it. I did contact them. They didn't have any information on it. So this is kind of the hypothesis I came to, that it was either an administrator or a student or a professor or a teacher that had this, or it stayed inside a computer library type deal, computer hall or computer library, and it just stayed there and never really left. So for the different types of processors we use, we have two actually basic ones that we use every day. I'm going to get back to the PowerPC in a minute, because that is really something that is old and we don't use on the consumer market anymore, or even the professional market, depending on which one you're in. But like I said, we'll get back to that in a moment. So we're going to start off here with x86. This is what we typically are AMDs, our Intels, and this is going to be our example here, the Black Mac, which still runs perfectly well, by the way. So the first one, the first x86 came out in 1979. It was 8086 is what they called it. Then they went on to 286, 386, 486. This is what you see basically on most, laptops up until now, recently, believe it or not, and all desktops. So x86 is what we call a CICS, which is a complex instruction computing set, which basically means the code is written differently than like on your ARM processors, which we'll get to in a moment, which is everything on this side. So you use the x86 when you need raw power, and energy consumption is not exactly a concern. The laptop is kind of the exception, but now we're seeing in the market with Apple and tablets and stuff that's slowly moving away. But for now, we use it because, one, it's the oldest standard we have actually for computing, and all the code is currently written for it, so we use it and it works really well. And with modern technology, we're actually able to get more performance without using so much power. So like if you compare the battery life of this 2007, 2006, 2008, I believe, actually, I don't remember off the top of my head. This one is, again, a MacBook, and we compare it to the new MacBook. Obviously, we could only get like 2 to 3 hours out of the Black Mac versus almost 10 out of the new MacBook. We use the x86 platform to do basically our heavy horsepower when we need to do a whole lot of complex work. So then our second type is what we call the ARM. So the first ARM processor came out in the 1982, which is, when you think about it, not that long ago. So ARM focuses more on efficiency and, in most cases, as you see here, battery life. That's when you normally see an ARM processor, when you're focused more on getting through the day versus getting the most out of it. So ARM is actually a British company, or was at the time, I believe. I believe they're in the process of being bought out by NVIDIA, a graphics card manufacturer at the moment. So ARM, what they normally do is they're more of a licensing company. So they will create a product and they'll license out the design to other people, such as, Qualcomm, MediaTek, even Apple for their phones. Another one is Snapdragon, which I believe is actually part of Qualcomm. So they'll license it out, and then they'll make it, or they'll get that licensing and then modify it to whatever specifications they want to do. They want to add more cores, they want to subtract more cores, they want to focus on one thing. And speaking of cores, ARM, which is completely different from x86, is what we call a RISC, which is reduced instruction set computing. So again, ARM is focusing more on efficiency of running code versus power of just, raw computing power to get the same answer you want. So with ARM, since again it's focused on efficiency, the RAM is used differently. So where on an x86, 8 gigabytes might be the minimum. On ARM, you could get away with 3 or 4. That's why usually your phone only has like 3 or 4 gigabytes versus your computer, which is 8, 12, or 16. Because since they use RAM differently, and they don't need the same amount. So 8 gigabytes on x86 is somewhat like putting 16 on an ARM. So, and two, when you have more RAM, you're using more power, you're consuming more electricity, which again eats away at your battery life. And when you're focusing on efficiency, you really want to get the most life out of that battery. So another thing that ARM does differently than x86 is ARM uses what we call little big technology, where we're like in my iPhone 11 here. It's a 4-core. It's a 4-core where it has two efficiency cores and 2 high performance cores to make a total of 4. So when you're just scrolling through your Instagram, you're watching a YouTube video, you're on social media, you're on Netflix, you're using your GPS, it'll use the 2 efficiency cores to maximize the battery life of the phone. But once you start playing, let's say Fortnite, Raid Shadow Legends, PUBG, once you start playing some games or even editing on your phone or on your tablet, because a lot of tablets now, in fact, almost all tablets, with the exception of some Windows ones, use an ARM processor, it'll then kick in those high performance cores, and it'll blend the 2 together so that the high horsepower needs, such as the editing and playing games, will be using the high performance cores, while the UI and the basic stuff will be using the high efficiency cores. So again, you can get the most out of the battery, of the limited battery you have, and thus reducing heat, because no one likes to hold a hot phone. If you ever been playing a game for a long time, your phone gets uncomfortably hot, nobody likes that. So that's what they're trying to avoid. Again, back to what I'm saying, they're preferring efficiency over power, and when they do need power, they're trying to get as much power as efficiently as possible. So we got some examples here. We got the Sony Ps Vita. This is another little collector of mine. This is a Japanese model that I've hacked, because of course you do. This is a little charger here, but it's the coral one. This is one of my favorite colors here. The Nintendo Switch is another famous example of using a ARM processor. Play your games. It's basically in some way just a version of Android, the operating system. And of course, we have all our Android iPhones and tablets and stuff we have here. We all, because again, we're trying to get the most out of the limited battery we have. And ARM has come a long way. In fact, with the new Apple processors that are ARM based, which they call the M1 and now the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, we can get we're actually in some ways surpassing x86. And again, when you're in a laptop or in a portable setting, you want as much performance while using as little energy as possible. And right now, with the way that's going, it looks like that's going to be the future for all portable devices. And believe it or not, ARM is actually used in supercomputing. In fact, one of the fastest supercomputers in the world, which is in Japan, uses an ARM processor. So this is what we normally use, so just a little recap here of what we just went over. Normally, when we're sitting at our desk, on our desktop with a screen in front of us, the computer never moves, x86 is more than capable. It's perfectly fine because we're not really limited by power constraints. And then when we are limited on an x86, like on a battery here, it's usually optimized as best as it can for that task. And then when we really want to focus on battery life, when we really, want to get as much out of it while producing the least amount of heat as possible, then that's when we have our ARM. So another thing between x86 and ARM, and these are similar actually, is what we call the 32-bit and 64-bit. So x86 is the 32-bit version. So basically, to sum it up, is how long each, strand of code can be, or each, strand of data. So one of the famous examples, I'm not going to really get into that here. It's kind of a complicated topic that, doesn't really affect you because most everything is now 64-bit anyway. So what you really need to know is if you have a 32-bit system, you can only go up to about 8 gigabytes maximum, where if you have a 64-bit system, you can go all the way up to terabytes of RAM. So that's really the biggest limitation of 32 and 64. A 64-bit program or computer correction can run a 32-bit program, but a 32-bit program cannot run a 64-bit program. So that's basically, one can run the other, but not vice versa. So, the higher can run the lower, but the lower cannot run the higher. That's basically all we really need to know at this point. If you really want me to get more into the specifics, leave a comment down below. And if there's enough comments, I actually will cover it. So now back to our Powerpc Mac here. And the reason why I consider it a notable exception is because PowerPC, although it's not used in the consumer market anymore, it is still used in other industrial applications or commercial applications such as embedded systems. So an embedded system is basically an example, your Wi-Fi router. It's part of the system. You can't take it out. It's dedicated to do that one job, and that's it. Famous examples of PowerPC is obviously we have the PowerPC Macs, the G2, 3, 4, and the G5 series of iMacs. Another famous example is if you ever had a PS3, Xbox 360, or a Wii, they all run PowerPC. So the reason why PowerPC came about is again, it's one of the first reduced instruction set computers, processors, and they're trying to figure out how to run code more efficiently. PowerPC was an attempt at that. PowerPCs generally run hot. Again, if you had an Xbox 360 and you had the red ring of death, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So again, we're trying to what we call performance per watt, to use Apple's terms here when they did their famous transition from PowerPC to Intel. You're trying to get more without consuming more, because when you produce a lot of heat, for the user, it's uncomfortable. And when you have a whole room full of these, your costs are astronomical just to keep the building cool and the computers cool. And heat is really the number one enemy of any computer. You try to limit it as much as possible, because heat tends to basically kill everything. So PowerPC back in the day, it was better at certain aspects than x86. Again, when Intel, was trying to get its thing back together, Intel has had several, little spats like they kind of do now between Apple and, trying to do things better. That's a whole, again, history lesson that can be talked about later. So, again, one of the main problems with PowerPC was that they generally run hot. So if you don't have a robust cooling system, or your cooling system is designed poorly, again, for those of you that had an Xbox 360 and had the red ring of death, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They will, at PowerPC, any processor really, if not cooled properly, but PowerPC will fry themselves to death just from the heat. Even this one gets a little toasty once we start playing a game. In fact, for the next video, I'll be talking about resale value. Again, I've been getting a lot of comments about that, and we'll actually be playing Fallout on this computer while I'm talking about it, just to give you guys something to look at instead of having to hear my boring voice. So, again, we still use PowerPC, believe it or not only in embedded systems and other commercial aspects like servers and stuff that companies still run, but we also have them in space. So believe it or not, the Mars rover uses a PowerPC that is the same as in the previous model of this one, which is the PowerBook G3. It's a PowerPC 750, and if you have a Wii, it's the same one that's in your Wii, called the IBM Broadwell. So It's a different version than the one that's on the Wii and on, you know, the PowerBook G3. It's called the Rad 750 because it's shielded from radiation. And to get one will cost you $200,000 to make. So if you really want one and really want to, you know, upgrade your old G3 to something like that, I hope you have a lot of money, because that's made for a specific purpose. Again, what I mean by embedded system is perfectly that. It was made for a specific purpose, and for NASA, even though the thing cost like $2 billion, they chose it. They chose a PowerPC for that specific purpose because it met that specific requirement, which in space, you don't have an atmosphere to protect you from extreme blast of radiation. So they had to go with something that could handle radiation, which is why it was called the Rad 750, because it was hardened to protect itself from extreme radiation. Also, the Mars helicopter uses a Snapdragon 801. So we even have ARM up there in Mars and in space. It's a 801. It's one of the first Snapdragon processors for what they call the flagship smartphones. You know, some of the old, I think the BlackBerry Priv, I think is what they call it, the slide out one with the keyboard, and it ran Android. I think it had one of those. So believe it or not, you know, we still use processors for their intended purpose, and we build processors for specific things. For embedded systems, it doesn't really matter what processor you use. In fact, there's an older one than ARM. It's called Mips. That one is really a dying standard, kind of like PowerPC here. You know, really not used much anymore, but they still do exist, and I thought it was an honorable mention, not only because, you know, this PowerBook is, you know, the reason why I'm making this video, but, you know, it is still out there, and, you know, again, I thought it's still out there enough to be an honorable mention. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope y'all stick around for the next one, because it's going to be kind of fun with me just being terrible at video games. So stay tuned, hit that like and subscribe button, and comment to see more. Thank you very much.